His old combat reflexes taking over, Phoenix did a fast tuck and roll to get out of the line of fire of a Ruger AC 556K assault rifle drawing a bead on him from inside the copter, staying barely in front of a line of lead that stitched the hard-packed ground behind him. He came up spraying poison, catching the shooter across the throat and disintegrating the lower half of his face into bloody hamburger. Another merc was taking no chances. He flung a grenade at Trench that landed squarely at his feet. The explosion seemed to hurl Trench's body through the air. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the mystery merc. "You lose, motherfucker," the merc said as he and his pard stood over the smoking crater dug by the blast. Two powerful arms grabbed both mercs' heads and bashed them together from behind, cracking the skulls and instantly homogenizing the brain matter inside them to strawberry thick shake. The mercs dropped like ragdolls to Trench's feet. "No," he said, picking up their SMGs to replace his empty weapon. "You lose." So that ridiculous passage was from this amazing book. This is Phoenix #1, Dark Messiah by David Alexander. This was a leisure men's adventure paperback that was published in 1987 and was very enthusiastically reviewed by Ollie. So I'd grabbed this several months ago with the intention to read it, and of course GARBAUGUST came along and gave me the perfect excuse. And if that passage didn't tell you, yeah, this absolutely fits the bill. This is the trashiest 80s junk that I've ever read, and in this case I thought it was it was kind of amazing. So obviously this was written, during the height of the Cold War. Gorbachev had just started, his reforms and things like that. Obviously the threat of nuclear apocalypse was a very real fear and something that was often preyed on. This is no different. So this deals with that guy. He's an action hero named Magnus Trench, who's a former Vietnam vet, of course, and he's just this epic killing machine who's just so brutal and so violent and so manly. Now he's left the life of violence behind and started a job at climbing the corporate ladder. But then one day, this evil guy named Luther Enoch, who is like this Christian fascist cult leader guy who has like hands in all of the world's functions. He's basically like the radical Christian Illuminati. He basically engineers a scheme in which a terrorist attack is blamed. Some Syrian terrorists blow up a building, and then that attack is blamed on like Russian terrorists, and there's all this nuclear exchange, and everything goes to shit. And so among the tumult of this newly apocalypsed world, Magnus decides to go on an adventure to find his missing wife and kid on the other side of the US and see if they're alright, because of course. Things go very, very quickly from there. The main thing that I have to say about this book, if you couldn't tell from the passage I read, is that it is fucking bananas. There are several passages in this book that just made me laugh out loud, to the point where Aaron actually asked me what was wrong because he overheard me laughing. If you've ever seen the short film Kung Fury, it's almost exactly like that, except this is 100% serious. It's written with this wild, pulpish abandon, with these elaborately violent metaphors that are so over the top that like you swear they have to be parody. But from what I can tell, and considering the time this was published, this seems 100% authentic. I mean, it was, leisure adventure, men's adventure, guns and muscles and girls and explosions and death. And I just kept reading this, and I just thought, like, this has to be a parody. This has to be a parody. Trench is always spouting one-liners, turning people's heads into strawberry thick shake or ground hamburger. There's one very infamous scene where he kicks a mutant guy so hard in the back that it shatters his spine, and the spinal fragments shoot into his bladder, and he like releases urine inside his system, and he shits himself and dies. Like, that's just so many things like that, and he just keeps throwing things at the wall, just throwing and throwing and throwing, like no matter if it makes any sense or if there's any like reason for it. The main bad guy in this, Luther Enoch, he's this very charismatic sort of cult leader, radical Christian cult leader. He's basically implied at one point to essentially have psychic powers, because it talks about how he like studied people to figure out how to like manipulate them really well, and that's how he's like been able to sink his fingers into so many pies. And like there's a scene where he punishes a dissident by essentially hypnotizing him and making him shoot himself. And it mentions offhandedly that the guy was given like drugs beforehand that made him more suggestible, but essentially he's just like staring in the guy's eyes and being like, do it, shoot yourself. And then at one point, I guess this is a spoiler, but I mean, come on, you can't really spoil a book like this. If you've seen every 80s action movie, you know what this is like. There's a scene where Magnus fights the bad guy's sort of a henchman who's this assassin named Talon. He finds out that there's this like big underground lair that they built that's full of cryogenically frozen corpses that they can use to like make a vaccine to stop this plague that's been released after the apocalypse. And Talon is like, oh yeah, isn't this base cool? We discovered it from aliens that landed in the 50s from Sirius. And there was like no mention of aliens or anything like from space like at any point in the book, and it just shows up for no reason out just And when I say this is like an 80s action movie come to life, I mean, I really mean it. Just the over-the-top masculinity, the one-liners. There was this one bit where Magnus shoots a missile, a heat-seeking missile out of midair, and Talon, who's like coming after them in a helicopter, is like, it can't be! Nobody's that good! It's so funny. It's like every Gary Stu 80s action hero stereotype ever written put into one book. But from what I can tell, it's like absolutely 100% serious, and I cannot believe that. I cannot believe this isn't some elaborate parody. And like there's so many other just quirks of from what I understand, just quirks of men's literature in general, but in this book especially, like every single like type of gun is described like in like excruciating detail, like down to the caliber of the bullets and the model of the gun. It's like American Psycho, you know, like just so hyper fixated on like brand names and like hyper specific like calibers. And like what's funny about that is that like the things that happen in this book are so completely unrealistic and stupid that it's like if you're adding those for realism, for assumedly for added realism, like why would you go to these lengths? I mean, I guess that's just there for people who just love guns and want to know exactly what he's using, you know. Another kind of funny thing is that in Michael K. Vaughan's recent first GARBAUGUST wrap-up video, he's reading a very similar series to this called The Survivalist, which was written in 1982, which was 5 years before this. That book sounds very, very similar in that it's very heavily focused on like guns and violence and boobs and all that. But in this book, there's this weird tangent that the author goes on where he talks about like the world was sick long before the bombs fell, and he talks about, you know, like violent movies and metal music, you know, contributing to the downfall of society. But then he goes on this weird tangent about survivalists and like survivalist books, where he talks about how like, you know, they taught man that like something about like not respecting nature, or I don't know, whatever. He just goes on this weird tirade about it. And then earlier in the book he goes on another tirade talking just about like survivalist and like survivalist culture in general. And I wondered if that was a specific dig at books like The Survivalist, which I found very ironic because from what I can tell, this book seemed to be just as over the top and violent and offensive and stupid as those books. So I don't pot calling the kettle black here, I suppose. I mean, there's just so many things I could talk about. The black sidekick who gets killed, you know, so they can have someone to mourn over. The reason that Trench calls himself the Phoenix is because he models himself after this like Vietnamese folklore called Phung Hoang, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He gets so enraged after his black sidekick, who's this ATF guy named Rawlings, after he dies, he like roars to the heavens and he takes his machine gun and he shoots a shape of a phoenix with his bullets into the side of a mountain. And later on the Talon sees it, and because he's from Vietnam as well, like he understands the symbolism of it, and it's like this, you know, like, my god, like, who is this man? You know? It's just fucking hilarious. And of course, you know, in a book like this, it's full of sexism and racism, and of course part of that is just part of the trashy aspect of this, you know, is just a product of the time. But there are some parts of it where I think it went a little too far, even for me. Mainly, there's this girl named September Song, who's frequently described as Oriental, of course. But she's rescued from Trench after being assaulted by mutants. It basically goes into, like, her backstory, and it said that a year ago she was 14, and she was sold into, like, child sex slavery, but then she was, like, let go because she got too old. Disgusting, but whatever, you know. But then later on in the book, Trench is having sex with her, and like it's really like enthusiastic and very like detailed and like heavily described. That felt really, really icky for me, and I don't know if the author intended that, because I checked the sequence where it was talking about her backstory several times just to make sure I got it right, but it says a year ago when she was 14, assuming that now she's 15, and he's having our main character is having enthusiastic sex with a 15-year-old girl, and it's like, that left a bad taste in my mouth. But for the most part, like, it's offensive in like a fun, sort of entertaining way, I would say. Definitely very far outside of my wheelhouse. I've never read men's adventure. I've never read anything like this before. But if there's more out there like this that are just this delirious and over the top, I mean, let me know. I'd be curious to check them out. It's trash. It is absolute 100% trash. If you like that kind of thing and you can look past some of the really icky elements, this is the funniest book I've read in a long time. Like, there were so many passages where I was laughing out loud, and I almost never do that with books. But it was definitely not for the reason that the author intended. Yeah, if you want to read, like, Kung Fury or, like, one of those, you know, low-budget Chuck Norris movies in, like, book form, then I would recommend this. I believe there were 5 or 6 books in the series. I may read more just to see kind of if it gets even crazier and how much crazier it could possibly get from here. I don't know if I'll jump on that, because reading stuff like this, like 24/7, I think would be very draining. If you're in the mood for garbage, I mean, this is it. This is the one. This is quintessential garbage. That was my review of Phoenix #1, Dark Messiah by David Alexander. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you guys later. Bye.